So this is the first episode of this series. If you are seeing this on YouTube, I am personally quite surprised because the point of this is not to actually make it for release. This is the test run. It's a fantastic pop song, and it's the kind of song where if someone were to say to me, Uptown Funk, cover, I'd be like, nah, I'm alright. Yes, the video is done, and I'm actually really happy with it. But far and away, the biggest problem for me has been how long this whole process has taken. It took 2 years. But if you're making a music video with it, you don't just have the mechanical copyright, you have the synchronization. Basically, if I can afford it, you'll see this Uptown Funk video, and if I can't, you won't. Hi, and welcome to the channel. In this video series, I do 3 things. 1, arrange and record music in my home studio, in this narrowboat on the Thames. 2, plan and shoot music videos for that music. And 3, document how it went, what worked, and what didn't. The previous episode was the pilot. This is episode 1. I'm James Bell, and this is the process. Me. This is not the track I was hoping to do now. For me, the point of this video series is really to do cover versions. It's to do songs that other people have heard of. I was planning on doing traditional songs from the beginning because I'm kind of obsessed with them. And I was planning on throwing in some of my own songs too at some point. But certainly not to start off with. But I'm kind of stuck at the moment. From when I first came up with this video series idea, I knew which song I wanted to start off with, and that is The Boy in the Bubble by Paul Simon. It just felt like a perfect introduction. It felt like, well, it's the song that kicks off his legendary 1980s album, Graceland. And it's about the wonder and the horror of the modern world. It was written in the 1980s. I feel like it's dated about 8 seconds. Such a great song. I was starting to kind of put together all these ideas of how I might cover it. But yeah, then I tried to get the copyright. And I'll talk about copyright in a second and my kind of approach to copyright, but I tried to get the copyright. And the company came back and said, essentially, like, what's your upper limit? And I told them what the upper limit is. And they were like, yeah, okay, well, how about that, but 20% more? And I was like, I can't do that. Like, I have to budget for, you know, more than one cover version. So I just realized I couldn't do it. I mentioned this strategy to a friend, actually on the day that they got back to me. And she said, wait a second, are you getting like official approval for copyright for something on the internet in the year of our Lord 2023? Like, who does that? Just do it. And I understand that logic. But there's a couple of reasons why I want to do the legit approach. In the film Wall Street, Martin Sheen's character says that nobody who uses the word legit is legit, and that's probably fair. But like in this case, I want to do the legit approach. And the reason, there's 2 reasons really. The first reason is my like hottest and spiciest take, which is that I feel like it's worth paying money for cover versions. I feel like musicians should get paid. And yeah, copyright generally needs to be reformed, but I'm happy to work within the rules while the rules are as they are, even if they're a bit crap. So that's reason 1. Reason 2 is these videos are long. I don't want to pick a song, brainstorm ideas, record the audio, come up with a video concept, shoot the video, edit it all together, document the process, and then at the end of it, put it on YouTube and have the rights holders very reasonably say, nah, switch it off. So I want to try and get the rights clearance first. It takes time to get these rights set up, and I don't have another option, and I can just wait around for weeks, months, however long it takes to get the next one and the next one, the next one. Or I can just get started. So I picked one of my own songs, which is not a million miles away in tone from The Boy in the Bubble. It's called Already On to the Next Thing. I wrote it a bit before the pandemic. It was written about my sense of a kind of generational disconnect of the older generation, like my generation, just not really accepting that the world is on fire. Not really being prepared to acknowledge that the fundamental systems that govern society have been broken for a long time and are only getting worse. It's like they just feel like we've just had this really weird run of bad luck, of just unfortunate thing after unfortunate thing, but we can just stay the path, we can get back to the 90s. For me, like the metaphor I keep thinking of is, it's like we're all on the Titanic. Okay, we've hit a few bumps, but you can't be suggesting we change course, this course was set by a master navigator. It's complex, it's nuanced. Surely we can't change course. I'm like, change course, pal, the ship is sinking. And I feel like the response is, all right, well, where would you change course to? It's like, it's funny, I'm aware that I'm much more comfortable talking about cover versions than I am about my own stuff. I think one of the things about cover versions is I can talk about how the subject matter relates to me. If I wrote it, that's all there is. So I may end up talking more about the kind of nuts and bolts about how I kind of got it made. That said, I'm trying to say why this track. So I guess I feel like for so many people, songwriting is therapy of a kind. And whilst I do feel like straight autobiography in songs is not actually something I'm particularly interested in, I'm much more interested in trying to find out what emotion I'm feeling really strongly and maybe people around me are feeling really strongly and trying to articulate that. And this is like the front of mind thing for me. It's about anger, it's about frustration at slow progress. But it's also about the kind of somewhat liberating feeling of, all right, we've acknowledged there's a problem, or at least some people have acknowledged there's a problem. Now we're getting somewhere. Let's move on to the next thing. Okay, so I said earlier about how the ship is sinking and there's this generational disconnect and all this stuff. And afterwards it occurred to me I should probably, try and back that up a little bit. Before I do, I want to just quickly talk about whether or not art, in this case songwriting, should even be political. Now, I really want this video series to be a politics-free zone as much as possible. I grew up in politics, I worked for a long time in politics academia. I need a break. I also feel that art is just not a very good tool for politics. Sure, it gives the audience and particularly the artist all of the feels, but usually at the expense of important details, and it's generally not as effective as just straightforward political action. That said, I also think it's kind of difficult to make good art, certainly consistently, without sometimes being political. In fact, even the decision to avoid politics could be seen as a political statement. I think politics can be a really important part of art, but art is generally not the best way of going about politics. That said, for this song, it's kind of unavoidable, I think. So again, I'm going to try and give some evidence. I'm also going to link to a video on my main channel that explains a bit about my personal and professional relationship with the world of British politics. Anyway, let's get into it. So, when I say the ship is sinking, what do I mean? Well, I mean the British political system and actually democracy more generally. This website from the University of Oxford is ourworldindata.org. It's a fascinating repository of academic research, I think presented in a really accessible way. Here is their assessment of where democracy is at the moment. It defines what democracy is, broadly understood as rule by the people. Democracy has recently become less democratic. The world has become less democratic in recent years. The chart shows that if you're interested in the direction that society's heading, this is well worth a wander through. I just want to highlight this one conclusion that the researchers made in the endnotes. I'm going to read it. The United Kingdom and the United States were the only countries that could be classified as electoral autocracies because its political leaders were chosen through elections, but citizens lacked additional freedoms to make those elections free and fair. And just to state the obvious, this is the Oxford English Dictionary definition of autocracy, a system of government by one person with absolute power. Now, I could bore you with graphs till the end of time, but I do want to just highlight one graph from another website, the World Inequality Database. This is UK income going back to the early 1800s. The red line at the top is how much of the income went to the top 10% of earners, and the blue line at the bottom is how much went to the bottom 50% of earners. Now, unsurprisingly, it starts off pretty unequal and gets worse and then dramatically better in the early 1900s. Fascinating political time that no one really talks about. And then drops and drops and drops and drops and drops. And then in 1980, those lines start going in the opposite directions. And that should not be happening in a society that's getting fairer and more prosperous. Okay, so that suggests the ship is in trouble, but not necessarily sinking, right? I'll offer something a little bit more anecdotal. Just starting with the beginning of the millennium, we've seen a military invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq that broke pretty much every global agreement imaginable, followed by a global crisis of money with the 2008 financial crisis, followed in 2016 by a crisis of democracy with elections such as the Brexit referendum fought on massive misinformation and disinformation, followed by populist responses to COVID-19 that led to untold unnecessary deaths. Again, back to our world and data, this is deaths per million. These are countries of comparable wealth, and this is the United Kingdom. Now, I would argue that these crises are not just symptoms that something is fundamentally wrong with the political systems governing them, but each of these crises has made those political systems much, much weaker, particularly in the UK and the US. And as far as I can tell, no meaningful systems have been changed because no meaningful lessons have been learned. I'm not so worried about the actual music video side of things, but actually that's just because I feel like the problem of recording the track is the bigger challenge. I already did a version of it. I'll play a bit in a minute because I don't need to worry about the sound recording copyright. I'll explain why, but I wasn't happy with it. I don't think I did it very well. And part of the reason is that the song is about being frustrated that we're still doing the same old ideas that clearly don't work. We need a new approach. It's about the kind of the hunger for just something that's new. But if you want to express that in music, there's kind of an implied boast in that, which is like, oh yeah, I'm following all the new stuff. You guys are all just stuck in the past. If I'm making a song about, come on, new things, please, I have to deliver on that promise in the music myself. Like the music has to sound new to me. And that is a big challenge because for me, it has to sound new, but as ever, it has to be distinctive, it has to be coherent, and it has to sound good in a non-intellectual way. And doing something that it sounds new, but that sounds distinctive and coherent is the tricky bit. Again, as I said in the pilot video, I can just get a piano and go blah, 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 and make some noises no one's made before. Except for maybe the Muppets. The Muppets might have made those noises I just made, but like, you know where I'm getting at. But it will just be noise. It won't be something I find interesting. It's not about new sounds. It's about new ideas. And I have to capture that in a way that meets my own standards. I have to be able to listen to the track and then build a video on the track with the feeling that, okay, this is new. And this is commenting on that hunger for new ideas. So that's where I kind of see the challenge is. And yeah, I will come back to like, what is the emotion I'm trying to get? I want to capture the frustration that I've been feeling, and I know a lot of other people have been feeling, but I don't want it to be whiny. I don't want it to just be like, things bad, because, you know, We know that. I want to be like, okay, well, what do we do about that? I want to capture some sense of there are new ideas out there, possibly outside the bubbles that we make for ourselves and other people make for us. They're out there, we just need to find them. Okay, so what about this generational disconnect I was talking about? This is a lot harder to nail down. I can't just point at graphs on this because we're talking about narratives and perspectives and attitudes. And also, I realized I don't think I was entirely accurate in saying there's a generational split, because I know plenty of people my age and older who are mad as hell. This is really about a split between two different kinds of media, one aimed at an older audience and one aimed at a younger audience. Now, I was trying to find a way of really articulating what I feel is going on, and I thought I would start with, once again, the University of Oxford Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. Every year they produce a digital news report. This is actually last year's. This is an article on the changing news habits and attitudes of younger audiences. Now, I'm just going to paraphrase this rather than actually quote it. It is worth a read though, and I'm quite confident if you're under the age of 30, if you read this, you will instantly see exactly what I'm talking about. There's a part where it talks about why it is that younger audiences are avoiding mainstream news altogether. And I'm going to ruthlessly editorialize here. For me, I got the gist that they were saying is because they're delicate snowflakes who can't handle the harsh realities of life. And I wanted to have these websites in front of me to just try and illustrate why I feel that isn't true. So let's pick a mainstream news outlet in the UK. I thought I would go with the one that the Reuters Institute says is the most trusted, BBC News. So, the BBC News homepage. I have done like 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 takes of this because I just keep feeling like I'm not being clear enough. And the news keeps changing each day, so I've got to react to that. I've got to say, as a former comms worker, there's just way more going on here than I can unpack. Like, I would have opinions about every single article, but let's just try and get an overview of what's going on here. For the last few days, the main story has been wildfires in Hawaii, understandably. Now it's Trump being charged with crimes, again, understandably. It's more everything else on the website. I keep seeing the same types of stories over and over again. Horrible things happening abroad, very specific local stories, often very specific local crime stories, lots of sport, a lot about Ukraine, understandably, foreign tragedy, very local, very specific. This whole section, tackling it together. Now, I'll talk about this in a second, but this is just one part of this news website that looks like a government press release. Now, one of the first things that occurred to me is I found it quite surprising that there weren't any stories on the Hollywood strikes. For social media, this is like a goldmine of a story. The most famous people on the planet standing on the red carpet talking about like standing in solidarity with their unions. This is weird times. This has sparked all sorts of other conversations about whether other industries might unionize and push back against constantly falling wages. Now, there's no mention of this on the front page, but I did a search and there are stories about the Hollywood strikes. And they're kind of weird, and they're weird in this very specific British mainstream media way. Why are they weird? Well, they go into very personal stories of actors who I haven't heard of, saying strange things like most of us have got second jobs, so it'll be fine. It's almost like they don't want you to get a sense of a bigger conversation that's going on. It goes in really deep and really granular, and it's personal stories. And that's kind of the pattern of this website. There seems to be this absolute aversion to talking about any wider overarching issues. Everything is brought down to a micro granular level. But the part of the BBC News website that really leapt out at me was there are these headings at the top for, the big news issues. I was really surprised to see there was a tab for the cost of living crisis. I would not have expected the BBC to provide that much in-depth analysis on the potential causes and outcomes of the cost of living crisis in the UK. But that's because they didn't. When you click on it, this is just advice on how to manage your finances. And for anyone else who followed the 2008 financial crisis when it was happening, you'll see that once again, the big takeaway from this is pay the banks first. What you can do about your mortgage payments, how you can pay your debts, what if you can't pay your mortgage, useful tips on saving money. The gist is that the cost of living crisis is just this unfortunate thing we have to deal with, and we are, where is it? There we go, we are tackling it together. This feels like a government press release. Now there is some analysis if you scroll right down. Here, why is UK inflation so high? This is a really interesting article and I could spend hours unpacking it. I'm gonna try and do a top level thing. This is so vague, and it suggests that Britain has got a cost of living crisis because of COVID and because of the war in Ukraine. It doesn't go into details about why Britain has been so much more affected than other countries in Europe. And unlike on social media, you're not going to see any discussion of Brexit or austerity policies, or basically anything that suggests that the cause of this might not be just a really long run of bad luck that the UK has been suffering from. Now, like I said, the UK news changes every day, and today there is this story I feel I should mention which says UK wages grow at record rate, which is a positive story suggesting that the economy is in safe hands. And that is good news. That's not nothing. Again, I'm sorry, I'm paraphrasing this because this is a YouTube video, but this only skirts over the fact that although wages have increased, they haven't increased above inflation. So technically speaking, they haven't really grown, they've just fallen less. And that might well be because they were in such a terrible state last year. So I feel this is a misleading article. Now, to be fair, this isn't like the BBC's flagship news. This isn't the Today programme or Newsnight. But if I just quickly have a look at what Newsnight is talking about, for me, it's a similar thing. It's talking about what seems like big questions in incredibly narrow ways, focusing on immigration, scary foreigners, American politics, scary foreigners, maybe climate change is fine. Again, I'm editorializing, sorry, but this is just trying to get this big overview. Now, at the end of all this, I don't want to leave by suggesting that the world is going to hell in a handcart. This is just how I feel legacy media portrays the world. I think that there's a whole generation of younger creators who are going into these topics in infinitely more depth every day on social media. I don't think that they're avoiding mainstream news because they're delicate flowers. I think they're avoiding it because they expect better, and they fucking should. All right, just got in. I thought I'd give a little bit more context about this song and how it came about. I wrote this in, having had a look at it, 2018, as part of an attempt to overcome this writer's block, which I have had for a long time, and I'm still kind of grappling with. I realized the last music that I wrote myself and put online was 10 years ago. And the last 10 years, most of my energy was taken up with adapting traditional music for playing in bands or doing commercial music, doing production music. And during that time, I came up with more and more ideas and kind of meta ideas for my own songs and tunes. So many ideas that it just became kind of an incoherent mess. So I came up with this approach where I was going to try and write an original song and adapt an original song or tune every month and then put them online every month. And this song was part of that. I don't think any of the either original songs or traditional songs that I did during that time are particularly good. They all, to me, feel kind of underdeveloped, and a whole month for doing just two doesn't sound like it's a huge amount of work. Adapting traditional stuff is just way more time consuming than writing your own material. I also need to write it, perform it, record it, mix it, master it. Those things add up. So I think what I'm going to do in a second is play the version that I did of this song through the speaker and just kind of roast it for your entertainment. But first, I need to put on some coffee and clear up all these children's toys. This is actually a dog toy, but maybe this can be our little secret. By the way, for complicated reasons, I can't actually include the music video in this episode, but there will be a link to it at the end. If you want a sneak peek now, or if you'd like to learn even more about how it was made, there's links in the description. Anyway, on with the show. Coffee number 5 today, I think. All right, so this is the track I did before. I'll play it. I'll play it first and then I'll probably pick it apart. And I'm just going to play a bit of it. So.
How long's it been now? There's the same notification on my screen now. We've been back and forth and everywhere between now. You're still keen now. Listen, please stop trying to drag me back to 2017 now. It's over, it's done. I'm already on to the next thing. And then I say,
I kind of like the way the drums start. That's quite good. This riff, I thought it would be a good idea to have a keyboard bass and an acoustic guitar. It just sounds incoherent to me now. Like, the two don't particularly go together well. They're contrasting sounds. Combining them doesn't sort of fit the emotion of the song. The main vocal, badly sung, I think. And this is a whole thing of doing it under time pressure. The pitching doesn't always, the intonation doesn't always need to be in tune. But for this, like, I don't know, it feels kind of lazily done. It feels kind of half-assed.
we've been back and forth and everywhere between now. You're still keen now. Listen, please stop trying to...
Please stop trying to drag me back to 2017. This was written in late 2018. Of course, now it's a bit more time has passed and that whole kind of leap is a bit more stark. Now that I think about it, what the original idea was I wanted to create a new sound, and the way I was going to do it was I was going to record these basic kind of tracks, the drum part, you know, keyboard, bass, guitar, whatever, and then I was going to cut up the sound files within the editing program, within Logic. And so, you know, everything would be kind of stuttering and glitching, and it would be very clear in a sort of meta postmodern way that this was being tinkered with. And I guess that was my interpretation of a new sound. The thing is, that's what I was playing with in the 90s. This is not a new approach. Like, people like Aphex Twin have been doing this for decades. Even if it was kind of, I put it online as a kind of category of work in progress. But even as work in progress, it just felt like it had been done already. And obviously, that sort of works against the title of the song. There's also, I mean, just scrolling in a little bit. Okay, so there's this whole section. Where just nothing really develops for quite a while. Yeah, so I want to re-record a lot of this, rethink a lot of this, definitely redo the vocals. The vocals kind of get better as the track goes on. But again, everything about it feels sort of obvious to me. And I don't want to be super avant-garde on this. For me, it always comes back to these three things. These tracks need to be distinctive, be coherent, sound good in a non-intellectual way. They don't need to be like wildly innovative. Distinctive is enough for me. But they do need to be coherent. This feels completely incoherent. This feels rushed. And I don't think it sounds particularly good intellectually. But I do think that there's a track that I could really like in here. I just need to kind of clean all the dust off, I guess. Okay, so like I mentioned, the first version of this track I recorded a few years ago. And in that time, when I've thought about how I would come back to it, I felt like, all right, I sort of jumped in blind. It's all very well to want to do something that sounds new, but I still need some kind of reference. I need to get a sense of what kind of emotion am I trying to create, and really a great starting point is that who else has done something similar? And the track that I felt like would be a good reference track for this is a track from a movie. It's the first Miles Morales Spider-Man movie. There's a scene, the kind of leap of faith scene, where he leaps off a building and first discovers how to be Spider-Man. It's got this track underneath called What's Up Danger. This is another one of these multiverse movies. Now, there's another multiverse movie that everyone was talking about not too long ago. It was Everything Everywhere All at Once, a film that I absolutely adored. The idea of a multiverse was such a great metaphor for what it felt like through the pandemic to get all of these, how to put this into words, all of these safe, long-standing beliefs bashing up against each other and falling apart. Like, it did feel like like worlds were being smashed into each other and you were kind of surrounded by chaos and insanity. There's a reason why people are drawn to these stories at the moment. Daniel Pemberton, who did the score, captures that slightly kind of glitch in the Matrix sound really well, I think. And the energy of this scene, the leap of faith scene, I just felt like, all right, that's a good starting point. So I had a listen to that this morning. Before I had a listen to it, I was at breakfast just kind of idly thinking through how I would tidy up already onto the next thing. And I was thinking like, all right, I like the orchestral string bit. I might add some orchestral brass, slightly similar to the movie soundtrack. That feels like it works. Other than that, there's the drum part, there's the main sort of bass riff, and then there's a higher riff that comes in later. And I was thinking, what if I didn't do what I always do, which is overproduce? What if I just kept with that for the time being and just tidied them up? I like the idea of, instead of, as I kind of mentioned the idea was before, taking, say, the drum part and then using an audio editor and just kind of cutting it up and mixing it around, which has been done a lot. What about jumping between different sounds, like jumping between different drum kits? An analog drum kit in a particular room, just like a real drum kit, and then drum machine, and then some other kind of samples, some sort of found sound kit or something, and it just leaps between them in that slightly multiverse way where realities keep just kind of shifting into different gears. And I thought, what if I did the same thing with the bass riff and that higher riff as well, where I'll play it on different keyboards, I'll play it on guitars, maybe other instruments, and then sort of cut between them. That's going to involve slightly laboriously going in and sort of handcrafting those cuts, so there's a good sense of energy and momentum. I think the riff that was a bass riff, I'm gonna move up an octave to be more of a sort of like low guitar riff. And then I might rethink the bass and do something kind of similar to the What's Up Danger track. I can't quite tell whether or not it's one note that's being held or if it's lots of notes just over a period and then stopping. But that, I think, is what I'm going to sort of play with. But I think that could work. I'm going to try doing that. If it doesn't, I'll scrap it and I'll do something different. So I thought I had a pretty clear idea about where to take this track. But I also felt like I remembered I'd made some notes ages ago about if I was going to come back to this track, what I'd do to it. And I thought, well, I'll just at least have a look. And one of the angles there, when I looked at this now, I thought, oh God, maybe this is a better approach. And it was to take as inspiration the music of John Barry, who did the James Bond theme, amongst other things, as in literally that like dang 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 dang. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe that was written by Monty Norman, but John Barry performed it. Like most of the Bond music was John Barry, at least to begin with. But he also did these very atmospheric spy thrillers for films like The Ipcris File with Michael Caine. And I thought maybe that, the sort of paranoia of that might work with this very kind of twangy guitar and sort of dulcimer and strange sort of semi-orchestral 60s sounds. But that's the key, 60s sounds. I thought about that and I thought, you know what? It would be an interesting direction to take the track that I did in, whenever it was, late 2018, if that track wasn't about doing something new. I feel like if there's one thing that people of my generation should not be doing is going back to the fucking 60s. In this context particularly. So, I don't know, it's in the back of my mind. Maybe some of the kind of atmosphere may kind of spill through, I don't know. But yeah, that was a detour. I felt like I went down a bit and then thought I should probably come back out a bit. Quick little point. Remember at the beginning when I said that I couldn't get the copyright for The Boy in the Bubble? Yeah, I don't think I'd done enough research. There's a platform that's got Boy in the Bubble. It seems like it's a fairly straightforward thing. So yeah, I will do that soon, hopefully. I was thinking, oh, okay, if it's possible, do I kind of stop doing what? No. I'm already on to the next thing. Let's see it to the end. The last one took 2 years, for God's sake. All right, this is interesting. I want to talk about what is probably my most important and most neglected creative tool. It's the thing that I keep forgetting to use. And when I remember that it exists, I feel like, I don't really need it. And then I waste a lot of time and then eventually come back to using it. And then the process starts going smoothly again. The tool is a dictation device, a dictaphone. My dad was of the generation of people that used dictaphones. And I remember him using it around the house. And then I started to use it. And it's just such a crucial part of my workflow. When I've made music for professional clients, what will happen is they'll send me a brief. They want this particular kind of music, and they'll send me a reference track. And the first thing I do is I listen through the reference track, usually several times, with the dictation machine, and I just brainstorm ideas. And it gets me into a particular headspace. And by the end of it, I've figured out what needs to be done. Now, I've done that for professional work. I always forget to do it for my own compositions. I feel like, oh yeah, I don't need to do it. I just need to sit down, load up the software, and then just start kind of making a loop and tinkering with it. And I do that and I get stuck. It's like trying to, do some creative writing by just staring at a blank sheet of paper without any kind of preparation. The writing process for me, or at least a crucial part of the writing process, happens on the dictation machine. And it does need to be one of these machines. Like there's an app that comes with my phone. It's just unreliable. It doesn't sync properly. It's just cumbersome. And I need something that's going to move at the speed of my brain and the speed of my speech. This also reminds me that I've increasingly come to feel like, for me at least, the creative process is about two particular mental states, two different approaches. And if you try and combine them, everything falls apart. But if you separate them properly, things work smoothly. It's brainstorming and then it's editing. It's the process of just getting tons and tons of ideas, and then stopping, taking a break, coming back, selecting, and then organizing the best of those ideas. Anytime when I try and do the two of them at the same time, I can't tell whether an idea is good or not. I can think of ideas, but I can't judge those ideas at the same time. I have to have a break and come back. And that's what the dictation machine is so good for. I mention this because I was planning on working already onto the next thing late tonight. And I thought, okay, obviously, I don't need to use the dictation machine. I'll just journal, what I'm going to do in order. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll just use it just because it's slightly quicker. And I thought, well, while I've got it in my hand, maybe I'll listen to the original track I did and the reference tracks I'm kind of using and see, and just work out the next thing I'm going to do, which is the drums. And then pretty soon I'm just kind of almost drowning in ideas. And I just remembered, oh yeah, I just need to use the dictaphone more. This video series is not turning out the way I thought it would. I thought there'd be much more of me doing stuff. And it seems to be much more me sort of brainstorming, I don't want to say productivity hacks, but yeah, productivity hacks as I'm coming up with them. And this is another one, kind of. I just loaded up the laptop and started working on the track again and got it up on the screen and just looked at it and straight away felt like it's not going to happen today. It's just not going to happen. I've got no creative energy at all. It's been a really stressful few days, a lot of insomnia. I'm really sleep deprived. I'm just burnt out and run down. And I just thought it was kind of interesting the way that my brain responded to that, which was to straight away go, okay, fair enough. I feel like I've been doing this long enough that the first conclusion I come to is, all right, is there anything else constructive you can work on? And I was going through the various things, thinking, I suppose kind of admin. And then I thought, yes, I know exactly what I can work on that's not just something that's useful to do, but that will actually make me feel energized, motivated, and not so burnt out. Just kind of random, which is to tidy the boat. I don't know how much of a mess it looks like, but if it looks a bit chaotic, I can assure you off camera, there's just piles of equipment just chucked on tables and sides. And actually finding places where things can live a bit more permanently is just going to help with my peace of mind working in this space. I do love being in this space generally, but it makes such a difference coming back and everything just being neat and tidy. It also makes it easier to clean, and boats kind of need more cleaning than I find at your ordinary living space. So I've even got a little bit of a hack for how I do tidying, which may sound weird, but I found that although it can be quite handy to just kind of walk around and have a bit of a think about generally where does stuff go, I find the most efficient and effective way of tidying is the most enjoyable, which is totally randomly. Just like pick something and start, and then pick something else randomly, and quite quickly it will become an enjoyable process. That's why it's efficient. Sometimes I've actually made a to-do list and thought, okay, I need to sort this out and this, that, and I've sort of felt like, well, there's a kind of order of operations I should figure out. I can't really do this until I've done that. But actually, you just jump in with both feet, and it somehow works, I find. So yeah, that's my hat for today. I'll crack on with that. Okay, so I'm starting to go in and polish the track, and as I'm doing it, I feel kind of painfully aware of the fact that this doesn't sound new. You know, when you've been recording for many years, you develop all kinds of shortcuts based on, you know, your childhood heroes that turn into cliches, that turn into really dated cliches. But I'm also aware of the fact that one of the realities of, I think, any kind of creative project, particularly the music that I do, is that it's not going to sound great the whole time. And I've just got to put up with the fact that there are going to be parts that don't work, and I need to approach them a small chunk at a time, and then I can deal with those parts when I get to them. That said, I thought, okay, like, what does actually sound new to me? When was the last time that I heard a kind of sound that was like, oh wow, that really to me does sound like not just a new sound, but a new sound with a philosophy. Now, my music tastes are not infinitely broad, so a lot of it's going to depend on what I happen to happen upon. But the last time I felt that was with hyperpop, and particularly with the band 100 Gex. And I thought, oh yeah, okay, that's at least something to listen to in the background for this track. The other person, or actually people, who have really made an impression on me in terms of a new sound are Billie Eilish and her brother Phineas. And actually, there's kind of a similarity in the 100 Gex and Billie Eilish sound in that it's quite stripped down, it's programmed sounds rather than analog instruments, and it's really compressed. And they do interesting things with kind of making the sound dirtier. They approach it in different ways, and sometimes they approach it in the same way. So yeah, those are going to be some things I'm going to add to my playlists and just have a bit of a listen to. And as I say, just kind of try and keep in the back of my mind. As I was adding them to the playlist, I was like, oh, wait a minute, I forgot the person who for me has for a long time been the most interesting figure in British music, which is Little Simz. So yeah, that's someone else I should definitely add to that kind of sonic landscape for this track. So this is technically episode 1 of this video series. I have already done the pilot, and actually I'm doing episode 2 at the same time. I'm starting to get the sense of how these videos are shaping up. There's an introduction at the beginning, and then I talk, and then I talk some more, and then there's a lot of talking, and then I might pick up an instrument and play for like 6 seconds, and then there's more talking, and then lots of talking, and then a bit more talking, and then I'll just suddenly say, oh yeah, I basically recorded the track yesterday. I didn't quite do it yesterday, but it seems to be the case that I do need to just ruminate and mull and kind of ponder and think through all the logistics, and then start. And then when I start recording the track, like I did, what was it, 2 or 3 days ago, I think I tend to jump in with both feet. And in my head, I'm always very like, oh yeah, I'm gonna work very linearly. I'm gonna start with the the drums, I'm going to just kind of build them up, and then when that's finished, I'll start. I don't do that at all. I'm like, I'm going to mix everything finally. I'm going to get all the sounds perfect. I'm going to do this thing. I kind of jump into it chaotically, do everything at once, and then start to realize that it sounds terrible. And then I get stressed about it. But at this stage, having been doing it for so many years, I'm stressed, but I'm used to it. And I'll basically sleep on it and think, all right, this thing doesn't work, maybe I can try this. I've probably got that one the wrong way around. Maybe I shouldn't do this on keyboards. Maybe this should be on guitar. And then I'll attack it again, and then it will sort of start to come together. And then just very quickly, it's all I want to work on. I focus on it. I'm just kind of jumping in, fixing. And then I get to the point where I'm at now, where there's still quite a bit to do, but I feel I understand the track. I need to do the vocals. I'll do them tomorrow. And I need to kind of add a lot of little touches. I think I need to finesse a lot of details. I think that's the kind of track it's going to be. But yeah, I feel like I get it now. And I think that's the pattern of how these videos are going to work. Incidentally, I've talked so much about how I need this track to sound new, that it needs to be just some sort of, I guess it suggests it needs to be some really innovative sound. Taking a step back, it's not wildly new, it's not wildly innovative. But at the moment at least, I am happy with it, because I realize I'm not craving something wildly innovative. I'm not looking for reinventing the wheel. I just want something fresh, a fresh perspective. When I break down the various different components, like the drums for a lot of the track are, if you just look at them in isolation, kind of fairly standard, sort of, you know, indie funk rock from the 90s, you know, drum kit. The main riff, which was on keyboard before, is now kind of not a million miles away from a Jack White riff. I've got some orchestral elements that are quite similar to the What's Up Danger track. Yeah, as I say, it's not in its components wildly innovative. But the purpose for me is to be distinctive and not be so innovative that I'm not actually saying anything coherent. All right, let's quickly nerd out about microphones. When I was in my teens, the first, or actually maybe the second microphone that I ever got was this totally bog standard Shure SM58. It's the microphone you see at kind of most gigs generally. It's kind of the industry standard. And whilst it's not fair to say that I hated it, I certainly didn't rate it. But I've really started to realize why this mic is the industry standard and why people hype it so much. I remember hearing, oh yeah, Kurt Cobain used to use an SM58 on Nirvana stuff. And I was like, what? That's like super studio quality stuff. And I was like, how could that microphone produce? Now I realize that this suits me for a lot of different reasons. But one of the main ones is that it's very good for people whose voices naturally have got a lot of sibilants, that somehow seem to pronounce all their S's really excessively. And I am very much one of those people. I've produced for other people. I've recorded singers who've had no problems with sibilants, and then I use the same setup and it sounds terrible. Now I realize, oh yeah, there's a reason why this is kind of cracked up to be what it's cracked up to be. The other thing that this is really good for is it lets you really get up close. You can really get up close to a condenser mic, but a condenser mic is sort of squashing the sound, it's compressing it, and it's going to pick up a lot more. I think what's great about these mics actually is how little they pick up. They only pick up what's like directly in front of them, and that's actually what you want for singing, because I'm on a boat and the river is so noisy. You just have people kind of rubbing by and there's planes and everything else. So yeah, I'm trying this out. I actually got the condenser mic out just in case I was going to use it for this track. But in the end, I've just used the SM58. If it doesn't work, I'll have to go back and tweak it, but I reckon this is going to work. One more thing about recording the vocals for this. I did say, oh yeah, I did a sloppy job beforehand, and yeah, I kind of did. Like I should have landed on the notes better, but just having recorded the vocals, I find this a really hard song to sing. You need a lot of precision. How long's it been now? There's the same notification on my screen now. That goes quickly. Hitting those notes precisely, yeah, is tricky, and I'm a bit out of practice. But yeah, so apologies to previous me. Also, I basically finished all the vocals and then had a power cut, like just before the last line. Thank God for laptops. Okay, so I'm working on 2 tracks at a time, 2 videos at a time. And I'm at the point with both projects I'm working on where I'm just kind of finishing up the audio track and starting to think about what the video is going to look like. And in the process of doing this, something that I found fascinating is it's really given me a sense of why it always takes me so long. There's really 2 answers. The first answer is it's hard finding time. There's just so many other commitments. For example, I should have fixed the leak on this stove a long time ago, and I'm gonna eat up this Sunday morning fixing this rather than getting on with the tracks. I'd rather be working on the YouTube videos, but such is life. So that's part of it. But the other reason is I just always overestimate how much time it's going to take. Why I find this particularly fascinating is I am in my kind of mid to late 40s right now. I started songwriting and really kind of falling in love with it and being obsessed with it when I was 12, 13. I decided to take it more seriously when I was in my late 20s. Couldn't find a way of actually doing the kind of thing I wanted and paying the bills, so it's always been a kind of something I do when I find the time. But I have been obsessed with it for decades, literally decades. And so perhaps it's not that surprising that I do keep thinking, oh, sorry, I know what I'm doing. I bring ideas from all sorts of different art forms. I've learned how to mix and master myself. I've learned how to engineer myself badly. I've learned how to play lots of instruments badly. And I feel like I should be able to kind of work to a fairly quick work through. Making this video series, the process, really examining the process, has made me realize, well, if I am always trying to do something new and different and push myself, I am going to keep running into problems I've never encountered before. And I'm also going to keep running into problems where I have encountered them many times before, but because everything is new and complex, I'm, a bit of the way into it and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, that's why this thing isn't working. I need to do, whatever. This is why working on one project at a time quickly never works for me. And this is why doing 2 projects at a time, which is all I've got the bandwidth for at the moment, but at least 2 is a better approach because I mull on each project for longer and I can see problems. It just basically gives me more time to identify problems. But yeah, it's really got me thinking. I'd love to be able to just be writing and producing songs particularly really quickly. But that is a trade-off. If I want to do something that's new, and that's new for me at least, something that I feel says something that hasn't been said before, both in terms of lyrical content and in terms of how the music represents those lyrics, or if it's an instrumental in terms of a sound I haven't heard before, that's just gonna take time. And I think it's possible that this video series is gonna help me really see where I am wasting time. But at the moment, it's making me feel like, yeah, when I look at it, I'm just like, all of this was gonna take more time than I hoped it would, and that's just something I need to live with. Again, there's this question of, can you make a sustainable YouTube channel based on that? Who knows? But I want to start by making the thing as well as I can and then focus on how to do it quicker. All right, we are well into the cold season now. And the track is finished, the audio is finished. I might go in and tweak it a little bit more, but I think it's done. And that is kind of an achievement because I did say that there was this big challenge with the track, that it needs to sound fresh to my ears at least. And there's a funny challenge just in trying to get music that sounds fresh to someone who's middle-aged like me, because you've heard so many cycles of things coming in and out of fashion. So to a certain extent, it's more difficult for things to sound fresh, but also your main kind of core influences are likely to be decades ago. So, you know, you're likely to lean to music that's kind of very out of date anyway. So yeah, I was kind of thinking like, am I gonna be happy with this track when it's done? But I think the key thing I've been holding on to is this idea of it needs to sound distinctive. It doesn't need to reinvent the wheel. It doesn't need to be mind-blowing. I feel like when I was younger, I was much more concerned with how can I make something that's totally unique. But being totally unique is not as important to me now as actually having something interesting to say. And in order to do that, if you're messing with the form too much, the structure, the aesthetic, the whatever, if you're doing something where that's the point, that gets in the way of saying interesting things, I think. So that's kind of the trade-off. Okay, let's do a little mix walkthrough. So I'll just go through the tracks first of all. We've got a riser, just one of those noises that people who do a lot of production music tend to put in their tracks. Drums, got a bunch of different drum kits, and I'll explain that in a second. In bass, we've got just very keyboard, kind of dance, kind of sine wave bass. Now the riff is made up of a bunch of different things. There's a kind of direct input guitar, which is going through a bit crusher effect. And then there's a few keyboard parts, some added in at various points. Admira is the name of my classical guitar, which is just doing a little bit of backing. We've got keyboard pad, keyboard lead, keyboard strings, sampled trumpets. I don't think that source sequence thing is actually in there. It's kind of muted, but I obviously didn't delete it. And then we've got the vocal track. Let's go from the beginning. The riser, I think, it's just basically, it's not quite a sample, but it's just a keyboard sound. Drums is where things start getting interesting. So I took the original drum track and I tweaked bits of it. And then what I did is just get a bunch of different drum kits. These are all sample drum kits. Some kind of sound like a real drum kit, some sound like drum machines, some just sound like noises. And I took these different drum kits and I cut this drum track between them. So you've got this kind of mishmashed sound. I was tempted to go in there and really get granular and kind of leap between them. But then as I was doing, I thought this is about as much variation as I can put between drum kits and actually still have you as a listener and be aware of it. Beyond that, I felt like it was doing a lot of work that just wouldn't make an impact. So that was a key part of just giving this track its own kind of flavor. This keyboard bass, you're going to see here, one of the key things is that I gave it this, little room, this thing here. I put this reverb on where everything sounds like it's in a very kind of confined space. That was the point where I was like, oh, okay, this is the sound of the track. Everything's happening in like, in like a broom cupboard. Everything is claustrophobic, and that was kind of part of the sound. So that's on pretty much everything. It's probably on the whole mix. Is it on the whole mix? It's not on the whole mix. It's on individual tracks. Yeah, I suppose that makes sense to put it on individual tracks because there will be some points where I want to take it out so that a part will sort of stand out more. So yeah, the Admira here, we've got a lot of kind of saturation, a lot of distortion on there with the capitator, and probably got some on the Slate virtual mix things as well. A lot of compression, limiter. Everything is kind of squashed on this track. I think a lot of these were left over from the previous iteration of the track. I probably compressed them more, I probably distorted them more, and again, they'll all have this kind of little room reverb on there. Trumpets, it's kind of orchestral trumpets, which I also found myself adding on the next track, or Young Man Cut Down at His Prime. It's kind of epic in a box, I suppose. And I do get the sense it could become a bit of a crutch and I could use it too much, but I think it's worked for these two tracks. Vocal, this is the key thing here, SM57 vocal. Did I do SM57 or SM58? I thought it was an SM58, maybe, I don't know. That's the kind of mic you use in a live gig rather than the big sort of condenser mics. I wanted to experiment with using one of those mics that you use on stage rather than a studio mic to see whether or not I could get a closer, kind of more intimate sound. And I'm happy with the sound at the end of it, but there are so many effects on because ordinarily The mic's doing some of this work. The studio engineer is probably putting stuff through preamps. There's no preamps, there's just a mic in there. So you can see there's a lot of stuff there. So I might have to kind of do this scrolling because it eats up all that. I'm actually going to push this up here. Let's see what we're looking at. Oh yeah, I put some, yeah, I've got to send to more sort of saturation, more distortion on the vocal to give this really crunchy sound. Beyond that, I think that's pretty much the mix. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that particularly leaps out of me. There may be something that leaps out at you, in which case do put it in the comments. Yeah, I think that's pretty much the mix. So I mentioned I had a kind of disparate array of reference tracks I was working to. There was that What's Up Danger track from the Spider-Man to the Spider-Verse film, 100 Gex, the sort of hand crushed by a mallet sound, Billie Eilish, I guess, bad guy, all the good girls go to hell sort of aesthetic, and Little Sims. So I sort of wondered, does she fit in with the kind of aesthetic of those previous ones? In a way, it was leaning more into the kind of Little Sims sound that gave me the thing that satisfied me, that this track sounds fresh. Basically, what happened was, I went back to the original track with an idea to just like pull out the floorboards and just kind of redo the whole thing. And I found myself keeping each part and being like, okay, I don't want to get rid of that yet. Maybe I'll add more stuff to it. So I wasn't changing a huge amount, but I was adding more bits and I was tidying bits up. And then my wife had another baby and that kind of squashed the bandwidth and I wasn't able to work on it for a while. And then I came back and I listened to it, and where I'd left it was I was looking for kind of new parts to add that would create some kind of sonic interest, that would do something new and kind of wild and sort of a bit left field. And it's one of these things where, because I had time to go away and then come back and listen to it fresh, it occurred to me, no, the track's kind of done, like, or at least it doesn't need new parts added. In fact, the fact that I was at a point where I was wanting to add new parts to make it sound kind of unique and unusual and, you know, whatever else, is a bit of a sign of desperation, really. That if you keep having to add new weird stuff to make it sound distinctive, for me that suggests like you're not doing it because it's serving what the kind of emotion of this track. You're doing it just to kind of sound clever. So I thought, well, what does it need? And it sort of occurred to me, no, it doesn't need new parts. It needs something that's gonna tie the whole sound together. And it occurred to me, the thing that I could do is play with one of my favorite plugins, which is the sort of the Reverb Designer. Reverb, if you're not into the kind of technical music side of things, is essentially the echo of being in a room. It's like, what space is this track taking place in? And it sort of occurred to me, you know what, this track at this stage doesn't need more parts. It needs to sound like it's all in a space, and that space needs to fit the mood and it needs to be interesting. And I thought, what space should it be in? And I just felt like it should be in a small room. It should be claustrophobic. Now this is a track which is kind of expanded partly from the kind of What's Up Danger, like the orchestral sound, into having a string section and a horn section, like orchestral horn section. This is a big kind of sound. And I like the idea of it all sounding like it's in a room where you literally physically couldn't fit that many musicians. So it's kind of deliberately a contradiction. It just sounds compressed. It sounds, yeah, claustrophobic, I think was the word that sort of interested me. I started playing around with it. I thought, yeah, I kind of like the sound of that. I've just put a reverb on all of the tracks. And I was like, yeah, now I'm going to go in and just like craft it on each track. And that's going to be the thing that makes it sound distinctive. And that ended up sounding a lot more like the kind of Little Sims, for example, a track like Point and Kill, which just, you know, it sounds like it's all recorded in a room. Rather than, say, the Billie Eilish sound of everything is like right up against the speaker. You don't really get a sense of it happening in a space. It's kind of happening out there in like the ether, which is a great sound. It's just not what I wanted for this, as it turned out. I didn't know until I started playing around with that. I mean, I can now hear influences of all the tracks I mentioned. but not sort of in the way that I was thinking. There's the sort of electronic bass from What's Up Danger from Billie Eilish. There's the kind of graininess of 100 gecs, even though I'm not sure whether or not their sound is as much of a bit crush sound. It sounds like it's more of a playing with compression, but anyway. And then there's that room ambience and the sense of atmosphere from Little Sims. So yeah, it was a kind of long and winding road, as a man once said, but I feel like I got there in the end. I now feel like I said at the beginning, this track has kind of got a little bit of a bravado to it, I guess, of like all right, you're going to get something new. And that, as I was kind of suggesting, started to weigh on me, like this better be really new. It's not. But again, I feel like, okay, I'll tell you what. I think what it comes down to is that what I feel like now at the end of all of this, what's new for me is the sentiment of the track, capturing that frustration in a way that works, in a way that doesn't feel to me like it's cliched. And that's all it needs to do. There's lots of elements if you kind of break down the sound of that's a bit 90s, that's a bit 70s, that's a bit 60s. I'm fine with that because I feel like those are good tools to get those particular jobs sonically done. But yeah, now it's just the simple task of the video. All right, I'm in the middle of recording the audio, but I'm already starting to think about video ideas. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that I felt like the big challenge was going to be making the audio track, making the actual music sound new. And I hadn't really wrapped my head around what I was going to do for video ideas. Cut to today, when I'm trying to put something on TV to just relax the 2-year-old. One thing that always works a treat, but that I've massively overplayed, is all of the music videos of OK Go. She is just entranced, and fair enough, they're amazing. But they're kind of overplayed. So I thought, okay, who else does great music videos? And I thought, Michel Gondry, one of the filmmakers who just defined music videos in the 90s and 2000s. And so I found a playlist and I put the videos on. And as I was watching them, I was thinking, you know what? I should take some of the Michel Gondry kind of DIY aesthetic and I should use it for the Already On to the Next Thing video. It'd be nice to kind of stretch out from just doing green screen and then try and do something more ambitious. I realized I end up making quite a few of these little clips where I'm making a note of something that occurred to me and then immediately I think, no, that would be a terrible idea. And it really would be a terrible idea because Michel Gondry is a trap for someone like me. Like you can look at his video and everything looks like it's made out of toilet roll. And you think, oh yeah, I could do that, but I couldn't because he took like either he took like 12 days to make each thing, or he had a team of people who took 12 days to make each thing. Like it's painstaking, it's detailed, everything's in camera, but that's more difficult. Like there's no VFX or whatever, which I can't do, but I'm not going to be able to do the other stuff either. So what this really made me realize is when it comes to making videos, now that I'm starting to think about it, I need to make technical ease, lack of technical difficulty, the first thing that I think about. Like before I think about what emotion am I trying to convey in the music video, before I think about like what would be a good overall sort of theme and, you know, what will the visuals look like, it's got to be, can I achieve it? And it's a big mistake for me to think I should step outside of doing green screen stuff. Doing green screen on the boat, the thing is I can control the environment completely. As soon as I step out here, everything becomes more complicated. I need to think about who's operating the camera. I need to think about lighting. I need to think about, is someone going to move me on from this public place where I'm filming? It might be the case that I can do some filming outside the boat, but I really think that I need to start with the limitations and work within them. And then maybe at some point I can hire a team to help me. But until then, yeah, just keep it simple. Okay. So I'd accepted the fact that it makes sense to just stick with green screen. Don't try and make things more complicated. And of course, as soon as I'd accepted that, my brain started thinking, all right, but if I wasn't going to do green screen, what could I do? I mean, could I, for example, do, I don't know, something with movement, something like just a single take of me walking along and having like a drone film me? But then the drone would need to be in front of me, so that might not work. Could I, again, just do a single take walking and have one of those like action cameras on the end of a stick that wipes the stick out? I could rent one of those, I guess. I was thinking that and thinking, well, you're dealing with like outside light and you've got to perform and film and do all the logistics of that. It's doable, but, you know. And that got me thinking, all right, okay, well, where should this take place? Like, where is the conversation of the song taking place? And I thought, well, it's kind of in a meeting. I think that's what I always imagined. So I guess it should kind of be in like a boardroom or something. But then again, you're static, you're locked down. There's no, how do you get a sense of movement? And then I thought, no, wait a minute. It's not in a boardroom. It's a meeting, but it's not in a boardroom. It's in a car. You know, for a while there, I really felt like I was making some progress. Up to this point, it's actually been moving along relatively quickly. I mean, I'm always complaining about how this process of making songs and music videos just takes too long. But I was able to find quite a lot of time to work on this project. As I've moved from finishing off the actual audio track and I'm moving into the music video, yeah, I feel like I found myself in the doldrums again. Excuse me. Not enough caffeine, as ever, might be the problem. There's a lot going on at the moment. The main front of mind thing is that, once again, if you saw the pilot episode, my wife is pregnant and due date is just absolutely any day now. So we're both just waiting for that to happen. There's been a ton of work to do on the boat. I managed to fix one thing, and in the process of doing that, kind of found something else needed fixing, and then something else needed fixing, and the bedroom got some flooding under the bed, and so the duvet's up on its side and dehumidifier's going full. And yeah, there's been, this is what gets me basically. This is what tends to eat up the time, I'm finding. It's big projects that take huge chunks of time, and I have been able to mull on what the music video is going to look like, but it has just been what I think of as cheated time here and there. And weirdly, it kind of affects me psychologically on a much more general level. I saw a Vlogbrothers video of John Green talking about a similar thing, where he was talking about a line from the film Rushmore, where a soldier says to his sergeant, you know, I'm not even here, I'm in Wyoming. And that has become a catchphrase in his family for when you're just mentally not quite there. And he said that he uses that expression to describe when he's writing a book, which is something that he really enjoys because his brain is taken up with the problems of writing the book rather than with general anxiety. And that's something I find. I'm not a super anxious person, although I drink so much coffee that I often push myself in that direction. But I do find, and I think maybe like a lot of people, that my brain naturally, if left untended, will just veer towards anxiety. And I've really found that making music and also making these music videos, doing this particular video series has been really great for my mental health, because I wake up at like 4 a.m. just feeling anxious, and I can direct my brain to okay, well, what are today's problems in terms of the, music video? And it's fun to do, and there's enough challenges to keep me occupied without it feeling overwhelming. So when I have periods of like a couple of weeks at a time where there's just some kind of mini crisis or major crisis that needs to be dealt with, I do find that I'm just generally more anxious on top of whatever the crisis may be. Excuse me. You probably can't hear this, but the stove fan is just starting off. This is the first fire of the season. It is a beautiful early autumn day. Leaves just starting to turn. And I'd kind of love to just get out and wander around for a bit, but stuff to do. Anyway. So I'm at this point where I'm moving from the music to the music video. I don't know, I slightly feel like with the pilot, with Uptown Funk, I kind of fluked it, or the whole video was just based on me in front of green screen. Part of me wants to do that for every video and not give myself more problems. But part of me feels like I'm not sure that's going to be enough for the songs that are coming up. Interesting noises. And it's led me to think maybe I should actually be... Well, if I'm going to do more in these videos, I can go down the Michel Gondry route of trying to shoot lots of stuff in camera. All right, I'm going to need to wind this up because the stove is making some curious noises. But when it comes to, these new videos, I do feel like I need to find ways to give myself more options. And I've been thinking quite a bit about this. Do I try and shoot more in camera? Do I try and, use more props? Or do I try and get better at visual effects? And I'm kind of feeling like I need to pick a few very versatile visual effects, and I need to learn how to use them so that I can do as much as possible from the boat in this controlled environment and not go out in the world and be grappling with a million variables all by myself at this stage. And that's actually leading me to exploring generative AI art. Okay, so let's talk about generative AI art. It's something lots of people have been talking about recently, although I think people have started to realize some of the limitations of things like ChatGPT and Midjourney, but there's still the general acceptance that this is gonna change everything. The question is how much. So lots of people have been talking about it, but here I'm talking about actually using it as part of the process of this video series. Generative AI art as a way of coming up with ideas for music videos, particularly the visual side of things. I say particularly the visual side of things. It's worth noting that I have been using what I guess you could call AI, although maybe it's more machine learning technology, in my audio recording for years and years. There's a number of plugins I've been using. Music software companies who have used machine learning to figure out what most tracks sound like. There's like a range of frequencies that most tracks have. Like the bass frequencies fall within a certain range, the mid frequencies fall within a certain range, the top frequencies fall within a certain range. It helps kind of give things perspective. Now, these tools are, I feel like, frequently wrong, or at least they make bizarre choices. But because I understand the tools pretty well, I can be like, that's weird. Why is it suddenly boosting the, oh, okay, this is a track that doesn't actually have any bass in, and the AI doesn't realize that and is thinking that it does. So they're tools that do have limitations, and I've already started to get comfortable with them. I also know this is the kind of track where these tools will be useful, and this is the kind of track where they won't. And there are plenty of tracks where I don't need those tools, so I don't reach for them. Having said this, these tools are slightly different. They are very much technical tools for someone who is mixing and mastering. They're not creative tools in the same way. They're not creating art. And this is really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about using things like Midjourney and Runway and Genmo and Kyber and these various new AI platforms. I'm talking about experimenting with them to come up with art. And this is a whole Pandora's box, and there's lots to talk about. I did actually play around with Midjourney for the backdrops of the Uptown Funk video. Now I'm thinking about leaning more into this. And I feel like there are some big advantages to generative AI art for this project, and some big disadvantages. I'll start with the disadvantages. One of the things that blew my mind about Midjourney, particularly when I started out, was that you could do, imagine this particular picture as your prompt in the style of. And I was just like, wow, imagine, I don't know, like a tree in the style of Hayao Miyazaki. Imagine like a cat in the style of Hayao Miyazaki. Imagine everything in the style. And I just kind of got drunk on ripping off Studio Ghibli, I suppose. And that was fascinating to play with. And I think I didn't really have a problem with that because I was too busy being just mind blown by what the thing could do. I feel like this is the big issue at the moment with generative AI. It is the kind of intellectual property infringement side of things. Now, when this technology was first made available, I heard the argument made, I think by Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, DALL-E, etc., saying, well, really, this is no different to you learning how to draw like Hayao Miyazaki. You know, it's just that a computer is doing it. But, you know, we're not actually copying the stuff that he and his studio made. We're just learning how to make things in the same way. And to begin with, I think I was like, oh, okay, I guess. But as time has gone on, I think it's become clear to lots of people that that side of things, like how it was made, is not so much the point. The point is the result. If you ask a generative AI bot to create art, and it has taken so much from the Getty photography archives that it actually has a little Getty watermark on it, it doesn't matter how it came up with it. Like, that's copyright infringement. The result is the important thing. And I think this is one of the things, certainly from industry, and I've been talking with people about production music and how this is going to affect production music. Something that a production music library owner told me was that the CEOs of these companies would love robots to be able to create everything. But everyone else is a lot more suspicious, and particularly from an IP point of view. Corporations don't want to invest in generative AI and then get sued because laws have been developed that say, don't care how you made this, if this is too similar to that, it's infringement. I mean, basically, when it comes to IP law, no one knows where this is going to go. And I think that's why there's a lot of caution. And this is the main thing I am being cautious about. I will not be using any generative AI with a prompt that says in the style of a specific person or a specific group of people. And I think partly that's kind of concern about IP infringement, but more I feel it's just a straightforward ethical thing. That does feel like ripping someone else off, whether the law catches up to that or not. So that's going to be something that I'm going to be cautious about. I'm also going to try to use, probably and start off mainly focusing on Midjourney and then finding ways to bring those still Midjourney images to life. I'm going to try to avoid creating them in any one person or group of people's style. That's going to be a really important thing. It is worth mentioning, I've kind of been on both sides of this. I have found Midjourney a fascinating tool to play with, but also I've made stock music on the Pond 5 website. And one of the first things that happened when the big generative AI thing came along was they sent out an email to the composers on the site saying, oh yeah, we've used your tracks to create our generative AI models, check the contract. And so I've already made stuff which has kind of been training my replacement in the stock field. And I don't entirely know how I feel about that. Part of me feels like, well, that's kind of the stock game. What do you expect? But anyway, so I know what it feels like to have that happen to your own work. And I can very much see the logic that there should be laws to make sure that creators, be that composers, artists, whatever, whose work is used to train AI models should be compensated in some way or form. But yeah, I feel like that's the thing to be really cautious of. There's also straightforwardly a thing that I don't want to accidentally create using generative AI tools, art which gets me sued. You know, it's something I want to get into a habit of being careful of. So that's the disadvantage. What are the advantages of using it? Well, the advantages, I think, specifically are for this kind of music video, which is created by, at the moment, a sole creator, me. This, I feel, is what generative AI is perfect for. What I feel like I am doing is the opposite of what a Hollywood director is doing. Let's pick Christopher Nolan, for example. Hollywood directors are often telling stories that are fantastical about extraordinary people in extraordinary circumstances that it's quite easy to feel like that would never happen. That's not real. So it's really important for the directors to convince you that what's happening is real. And one of the best ways of doing that is to shoot as much in camera as possible. If you're going to add effects, just do them very slightly in post-production, but don't rely on lots of green screen. Just try and make the thing happen. Try and Ridley Scott it, try and Christopher Nolan it. Get everything in camera. What I feel like I'm trying to do in music videos is provide visuals for songs that are generally about everyday life. And it's trying to pick on things in everyday life that are interesting and kind of amplify them and often kind of glamorize them and say, look, the ordinary intimate moments in our lives are worth focusing on and glamorizing. And that's part of what I'm trying to do in music videos. So I am not trying to take the fantastical and make it seem believable. I'm trying to take the ordinary and make it seem kind of glamorous and interesting. So for that, visual effects, I don't need to worry about everything looking convincing. In fact, I feel very happy with things looking a bit artificial and things looking a bit stagey, a bit theatrical, rather than realistic. So it feels like it's taking an element of real life, focusing on it, and then dialing it up a little bit. That's what I'm interested in doing. So generative AI gives me the potential to just be wildly imaginative, not worry about logistics, not worry about making it look realistic. It'll be janky around the edges. It'll probably be janky in the middle. It'll just be janky, but it means I can come up with these kind of wild ideas. Okay, so tomorrow morning, I'm going to try and film the footage in the car. I've been doing a little bit of testing on this. It's been an interesting process. So initially I was thinking, all right, to a certain extent, filming in a car is good. It's a controlled environment, but you don't really have any control over the light, particularly if the car is moving. It's going to be really inconsistent. It's going to be difficult to set the exposure because you do not want to be dicking around with a camera while you're driving. This is assuming it's even a sensible idea to have the camera on while you're driving at all, and that's a whole other thing. So I initially thought, all right, what if I was to park up somewhere and just put up a green screen behind the two front seats and then take an image, a video or photo of the back of the car, so I could actually just have more control of the environment. If I wanted to show the rest of the car, I could. But equally, if I wanted to do a completely different backdrop, I could try doing that. So I drove to a car park, put up a green screen in the most non-destructive way I could do, set up a camera, and just realized that in that small space, behind the two front seats just doesn't actually take up that much of the frame. The side mirrors take up a lot more, and green screening them, I mean, you could drape a green screen over the car, but then you're going to block out a whole load of light, and light is so important when filming. So I kind of abandoned the green screen idea. I mean, something else I noticed is that I just really got the sense that you're going to be able to tell whether someone is actually driving or whether or not they're parked up somewhere miming. And I felt like it was going to be worth getting realistic driving. So I thought, okay, is there some sort of big, flat, empty car park that I can go to and drive around in? Because I am conscious of safety. Now, I wouldn't be looking at the camera. I would just be driving, and to a certain extent, it would be like singing along to the radio. But still, a certain part of my brain is going to be concentrating on this. I thought, okay, I'll do a little bit of testing. I'll go to a car park. I'll see what it's like kind of driving around. So I went to an empty car park, or at least it was empty on Google Maps, but of course it was absolutely rammed at kind of rush hour when I ended up going there. And I drove around a bit, and I could immediately see all kinds of problems. It's now winter, as you can probably tell, and the sun is really low. And so the sun would keep cropping up in the side mirrors and then kind of blowing out the exposure. So I thought, all right, maybe it does make sense to kind of plan A, but without the green screen. Just find a car park somewhere, park up, stable, relatively stable lighting, hopefully, park so that the sun isn't shining into the camera. And then just mask out the windows if I wanted to do some kind of changing of backdrop or whatever, and then just fake driving. But then I got home and I looked at the footage of me driving, and I did just think, I think it's going to look better. I think it's going to look better. I mean, The way that the light was changing, the way that the car was vibrating, it wasn't just that it felt like it was actually driving, it just felt visually more interesting. So I need to decide what I'm going to do. I think what I will do is I think I know a car park that is going to be empty. I'm going to do a few takes. I'm essentially going to just try and sing along with the radio. And yeah, we'll see. One of the things that's great though, is that because this is my project and it is frustrating how long it takes, particularly with the tiny amount of time I have at the moment, but still, it's my project. I can take as long as I want with it. If I shoot it tomorrow and it doesn't work, I can just look at what went wrong, come up with another plan and do it again. Okay, so at this, I feel it's like a very distinctive point in the project. I'm at this point where I feel like, I think this is an Adam Savage phrase, I feel like I can see it from the air. I feel like, all right, now I've got a sense of what needs to be done. I just need to kind of work through it. And that idea of seeing it from the air, I think, is a really interesting metaphor, because something else that I've noticed is that there generally tends to be two different halves of a project like this. There's a climb and there's a descent. The climb, before you can see things from the air, is when I'm kind of trying to figure things out. There's a lot of brainstorming. There's a lot of really trying to make sure the groundwork is in place and everything is being built on good decisions. But then there comes a point where I see what needs to be done, and then it moves into the descent. And something that I've learned is once I reach that point, I need to finish as quickly as possible. I need to switch from just giving myself plenty of bandwidth and, you know, giving space for ideas and whatever, to just hurry, hurry, hurry. And the reason for that is that if the descent gets too long, the whole project can kind of get derailed, because it stops being fun and it starts being a chore. And then it starts being a grind. And then it starts being a nightmare. And it may seem slightly counterintuitive to just rush, rush, rush. You know, what if there are mistakes? What if there are whatever? And there might well be in this final stage, but that's okay, because you can rush. Well, actually, I generally find that the best thing to do is to finish as soon as possible, and then take a little bit of a break, and then come back and then fix the mistakes you made when you were rushing. I find that's a much better approach to continuing to be slow and careful throughout the whole project. I'm not sure whether or not it's the case that once you see the whole thing from the air and you see what needs to be done, it kind of, you know, loses a little bit of the motivation and fun. I don't know. But I have, I guess, developed the instinct over time that once it's possible to just make a whole bunch of to-do lists and power through them, that's the thing to do, and to do it as quick as possible. Okay, so I went out and shot the car footage. I went to an empty car park. I drove around very slowly and I shot the footage. Now, I'm not a photographer, I'm not a videographer, I'm kind of running to catch up on all this sort of stuff. And characteristically, I underexposed it. It's dark, it's grainy, it's noisy. And I got the footage back and I just looked at it and thought, is this usable? And as I was mulling on that and kind of playing around with it and trying to find ways to fix it, I found myself thinking about an Adam Savage video I'd watched, recently. I'm going to be talking a lot about Adam Savage in this video series, by the way. So, Adam Savage, former Mythbusters host, former worker at ILM effects studio that did Star Wars and everything else. He was talking about many years ago making movie props with one of his sons and saying to him, look, you need to come to terms with the fact you're probably going to need to make each of these props like 3 times before you get the result that you want. And he said, kids being kids, which like had no patience for that. But he said that's a reality of making. You need to be prepared for the fact you may need to make the thing more than once. And I was thinking about that because as I played around with this footage, I found that there were ways that I could fix it and compensate for the problems. For example, it was dark and grainy, but I found there was a kind of filter I could put on that made it look like it was shot through a windscreen with rain on it. And that compensated for it, and it looked kind of moody and it sort of worked. And I thought that is actually more how I do stuff. I come up with interesting creative decisions by getting things wrong and then finding fixes for them. A few days later, I woke up and thought, no, I'm going to reshoot the whole thing. So I shot the whole thing stationary in my driveway, and it looks so much better. Okay, so with the car footage shot, it's now a case of putting it into Final Cut Pro, starting to edit the music video and thinking about what the backdrop's going to be behind the car. For that, I'm using generative AI art. I'm using Midjourney to generate images, and I'm using Pika Labs to animate those. Now, I'm actually going to talk much more about this whole generative AI process that I've been dipping my toe, kind of jumping in head first to. I'm going to talk about it in much more depth in the next episode, in the song Young Man Cut Down on His Prime. It's just more efficient for me to make 2 of these episodes at the same time. So I've been working on them both, and for reasons, I ended up doing the Young Man Cut Down on His Prime first. This one I'm kind of finding, already onto the next thing, I'm kind of finding more challenging because I'm running up against the limitations of Midjourney a bit more. But again, I'm going to talk about that in the next episode because there's a lot to talk about, and to a certain extent, making both of these music videos has been kind of the same process. One thing that I will say though is I've been very cautious taking on this whole The Process project about overextending when it comes to music videos, about thinking of an idea, getting stuck into it and just realizing it's way more complex and way more out of my skill set than I thought. I'm already starting to feel that I'm actually building up some muscles here. I'm learning how to do filmmaking, and I'm incrementally taking on more and more challenging things, which is what I was worried I would do, and then would just take way longer than I should do. Actually, I'm kind of feeling like it's okay at the moment, and generative AI is playing a big part in that. But it's also full of thorny ethical issues and probably pretty soon legal issues too. So, as I say, I'll talk about that more in the next one. Yeah, video finished literally last night. This was a challenge. I mentioned before that I worked on this episode and the next episode at the same time. And I also mentioned that for reasons, I did the next one first, Young Man Cut Down on His Prime. And that's because I thought that was going to be much more difficult. I brainstormed both of them and thought, okay, how is the video going to work? What are the themes going to be? What's the basic narrative going to be? And I looked at the 2 of them and I thought, Young Man Cut Down on His Prime is just trickier. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get that work. Actually, and I'll obviously talk more about that in the next one, it was kind of a delight, and I was really amazed with the results that I got. With already on to the next thing, I mean, for example, when I started generating the videos from the Midjourney images that I'd made, I got the results back and I was like, I don't think this is usable. I think the quality is just not there. And these videos are rough around the edges, and I'll talk more about that in a bit, but there's rough around the edges, and then there's just so kind of janky it's distracting, and that's what I thought I was going to get. But I just did it again and again and again, and did loads and loads of different takes, loads of different generations, loads of, whatever. And then after a while, weirdly, Pika Labs, the software that I was using, I think started to figure things out. So for example, as you'll see in the video, I'm generating the backdrops behind the car, and sometimes 2 things are moving in different directions. The car is moving in one direction, and then there are planes moving in another direction. Pika couldn't figure that out to begin with. But as I started doing it, after a while, I think it's sort of whatever algorithm is working, got the sense that, oh, okay, if there's a road, he wants it going in this direction. And if there's a plane, he wants it going in that direction. And I had to kind of isolate bits of and then say, this plane is moving from the left frame to the right frame, and kind of educate it like that. And after a while, it seemed like it was like, oh, okay, I kind of get the hang of that. So that was one challenge. Then when I started putting things into Final Cut Pro and actually making the video, I thought this just looks so unrealistic. Like, maybe I can get away with it looking a bit kitsch, that the inside of the car looks so different to the outside of the car. But gradually, and here's where I feel like years of recording audio in digital audio workstations has really helped, as I was able to kind of apply the same principles I'd use in that, of checking references and saying, well, how should it look? And they're saying, all right, well, maybe it needs this and maybe it needs this, and then just layering them in very gently so that you hopefully don't notice them, but they all add up to a more cohesive picture. So there was a lot of that. And then, you know, at the end of it all, there was just a lot of going through the entire music video and having to fix things frame by frame. If I was going to do it again, I'd really pay attention to where my thumbs were on the steering wheel, because that and masking out the background kept interfering with each other, and I just had to kind of mask my thumb into the shot all the way through. Ducks. I think we're safe. So yeah, it was a challenge. It was a lot more work in the end than Young Man Cut Down on His Prime. Okay, well, let's actually get down to it. Let's ask the question. I think it all came together in the end, but I'm not entirely sure. Something that I realized when it was finished is that I went into this with really high expectations. I'm not working on someone else's song. I'm not working on something that was a hit and some really talented artist did like 85% of the work and I'm just doing a little bit of, polishing in my own way. This isn't a traditional track where there's a lot of adaptation, a lot of research, but still I can always say, well, you know, I'm working with the song I was given. This is all my creation. And I set myself the challenge of doing something that was just new and fresh. And I'm not sure whether or not I achieved that. I'm not sure whether or not I'm going to come back and think, it's fine. It's just fine. Because I've had my head down and been focusing on it a lot, it's difficult for me I don't have that perspective. I don't know how I'm going to feel about it coming back to it. I may sort of think, oh wow, it works a lot better than I thought it did, which I often feel. I may come back and be like, God, you missed this thing and this thing, which is just dragging it down. So yeah, I don't know. But at the moment, I feel like when I think about all the things I was trying to achieve beforehand, I look at it and I'm like, yeah, I feel like I hit that beat. I feel like I hit that beat. And ultimately, when it comes to doing something new and sort of fresh, I feel like there's still a sort of a story, a narrative in the song, and I need to tell that. And I'm kind of restricted by that to a certain extent. You can make the choice to say, all right, screw the narrative, just do something wild and crazy. And that's fine, but that's not what I'm trying to do in this song, or most of the time, really. Like, the story takes precedence. So, yeah, who knows? Maybe I'll like it in the future, maybe I won't. In terms of what went well, there's one thing that I was really happy with, one decision that I made. And I kind of made a joke about how I was thinking about... I'd been listening to an Adam Savage podcast where he was telling his son that if you want to make something that you're proud of, you probably need to make it 3 times. And I remember him saying, young people never want to do that. And I remember thinking, you know, I see where he's coming from, but I probably don't need to do that because I think I can make this work. I am so glad that I didn't just make the thing that I'd done work. The footage I got the first time involved me driving around an empty car park, and what I got was the natural light moving on my face. And that I just didn't even bother to try to replicate. The more you look at the already onto the next thing video, the more you can see that it's unreal and it's kind of full of mistakes. I tried to mask my thumb into the shot, but still this collar is jittering in and out. My ear is occasionally jittering in and out. The more you look, the more you can see wrong with it. But what I got from reshooting was actually my face in focus in good light and the whole car in kind of fairly good light. And then I was able to play with that. Had I had something which was underexposed, it was underexposed. And the focus wasn't particularly reliable. I've had real problems figuring out the autofocus for this camera. I think I've done it now, but for a lot of this episode and the next episode, I didn't. That first footage, I didn't really have it figured out. And I thought, well, maybe it's in focus enough. But yeah, coming back to it, I ended up with much more sort of bland, less characterful footage. And that's exactly what I needed to put the character in later. So that went well. I was really happy with that. Well, for me, there's always this threshold of how many problems do you leave in? How many problems do you leave unfixed? There comes a point, certainly at the beginning, when it just makes sense to say, you know what, I'm not happy with this, I'm going to do the whole thing again. But as you get further and further into the process, that becomes more and more disruptive. You really need to think, okay, am I going to just pull up all the floorboards and redo this? And if I do, can I guarantee I'm going to end up with something better? Maybe this is as much as I can manage with my skills and budget. So you've got to make that trade-off. I can spend time looking at this song and looking at the music video and feeling like, I wish I'd fixed that, I wish I'd fixed that. That said, and I know I'm talking about kind of what went badly, but the flip side of that is when I look at the video at the moment, I do feel like if I was to fix these little details, it wouldn't make a substantive difference. Now, if this was professional work I was doing for a client, that's a different story. You know, if it's just for professional consumption, I think we all understand there's a kind of basic professional standard like you would expect in TV and film. And if you see something that's shonky, it just takes you out of it. So that's not what I'm aiming for. And that's why I can feel like I don't think that fixing these little things would have moved the needle. So, you know, it slightly bothers me, but what can you do? What went badly? Something else that I'm wondering about. I've talked a bit about AI here. I'm going to talk a lot more about AI, and particularly the sort of legal and ethical implications in the next episode. But I will say, I found Midjourney to be such a useful tool, but I'm worrying about how much it's possible for me to take it on myself to avoid ripping other people off. So for one shot, I was editing the sky full of aeroplanes, and I generated a few different Midjourney images with kind of different prompts. And when I got them together and was, looking between them for various reasons, I realized that chunks of them were exactly the same. You could take them and just copy them and paste them on, but the prompts were different. And it did make me think, is that just the algorithm? I was like, I know how to do a bunch of planes. Or has it just found someone else's photo with a bunch of planes and be like, this works, I'm going to copy and paste it. From the perspective of being a creator, if Midjourney is going to do that, I can't really rely on it. I can't rely on it to not steal from other people. So that's a concern. I mean, that said, I don't know whether that's what's going on. So at the moment, I'm just going to keep my eye on it and see how it goes. Finally, in terms of what went badly, there's the same old thing if it just took ages. But actually, that leads into the next point. I feel like I'm starting to make peace with how long these episodes take. And part of that is because it's occurred to me that in terms of playing the YouTube game, what I can do is make these feature-length episodes, and then I can just cut them up into little bits and do a clips channel and have that as a more sort of bite-sized way of getting what for me is kind of the most interesting part, which is the stuff that I've learned. All the little ideas, the things that I've tried, whatever, I can, as I say, I can kind of cut them up. So I don't feel so bad about like producing these episodes on a weekly basis, which is just not doable. There's so much that's got to be done. I feel like these work being long. I may change my mind. I haven't actually published these on YouTube yet. I don't know how it's going to go. YouTube may just punish me, may just squash me if this is just not what people want, in which case I'll adapt. But it's also been the case that trying to figure out the pilot in the middle of a pandemic, becoming a parent and all these various other things, day job and whatever else, it took me 2 years to get that first one put together. Now, again, I want to qualify, I wasn't spending 2 years doing 9 to 5 on this, but it was when I had time. I now think, roughly speaking, that getting 2 episodes done has taken me about 9 months, and that's still a crazy amount of time. But when I've looked at what the problem has been, I've been able to get all the different aspects of these episodes done relatively quickly. It's just been because it's, not full-time job and not childcare and whatever else, it's got to be lower on the list of priorities. Like a few months ago, one of my kids got sick. Sick enough so that we had to take her into hospital. And that basically just knocked out a month of work, just the way that it panned out. And there's nothing I could have done about that in terms of being more time efficient. That's just kind of how life works. But yeah, I sort of realized it's going to take as long as it's going to take. It's just fun though. I really enjoy doing it. And so I think it would be more of a sweat if I felt like, oh God, I'm not happy with it. I'm not happy with the results that I'm getting. For me, this is about capturing the joy of the creative process of making stuff. And I enjoy looking back at them when I edit it and put it all together. I'm like, yeah, I like the vibe. So yeah, that's where we're at. There we go. Using my sophisticated lighting technology, I've closed the curtain a bit. I just want to say thank you for making it all the way to the end, assuming you did make it all the way to the end. And if you just jumped in for the ending video, that's fine too. I want to mention about band names, because when you are a musician and you're putting your music out in the world and your name is James Bell, that's an incredibly generic name. It's kind of similar to the kid from Billy Elliot. And so the way that I try to make it a little bit more memorable is using band names even when it's just me. I use a different band name for each project. So for cover versions, it's James Bell and the Algorithm. And for original material, just really to be a bit more specific and memorable, it's James Bell and the 0.2. So that's that. And I'm going to finish up with one last point that I only noticed when editing. You might be lost out on a post-apocalyptic highway, you might be chased by terrifying feral gangs, or you might be trapped in some kind of twisted simulation of the Cotswolds, but still, you should really wear a seatbelt. Already on to the next thing. Let's watch the video.